Is Brent Venables one of the top 25 coaches in college football?
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I'm John Williams of Sooners Wire and USA Today Sports. And today we're going to talk about National Signing Day. We're going to get into whether Oklahoma should have a spring game in the future. What's the future of spring games in college football as Matt Rule debates Nebraska's spring games future as well. We're also going to talk right now about On3's head coach rankings. The Oklahoma Sooners head coach, Brent Venables, came in at number 23 in the rankings. And listen, I think that is an interesting place for him to be, because after a 6-7 season, you'd think that there wouldn't be a whole lot of respect put on Brent Venables' name, but there still is. And I'll tell you what Ari Wasserman of On3 had to say here. He said, "There is no question Venables is one of the most impressive defensive minds in college football. You could make the case he's every bit as responsible for Clemson's peak success as Sweeney, who found his way into the top 10 on this list. But Venables' run as a head coach hasn't gone smoothly, bottoming out last year when the Sooners were decimated by injury. Venables returns next year in a must-win scenario and brought in quarterback transfer John Mateer from Washington State. Oklahoma should be better than it is, and there is a good chance the Sooners break out next season." So I think where Wasserman is coming from is very reasonable. I think understanding that Oklahoma was injury-plagued in 2024 is a part of the story of that team. At the same time, I have a hard time putting him inside the top 25 anywhere, because you have 2 losing seasons in your 3 seasons. And listen, I've provided the context. I'll continue to do it. That 2022 team, it was lacking of defensive talent outside of a few guys. Danny Stutzman was in his first year as a starter. You had guys like David Agwebu playing out of position, playing linebacker, and you just didn't have the talent and the depth defensively to have a good defense. Well, in 3 years' time, he's turned the Oklahoma Sooners into a good defense. And then lo and behold, the year that the defense kind of really breaks out, your offense is terrible because you have an incredibly injured group of players. At the same time, you've got to work with what you're dealt. And unfortunately for Brent Venables, 2024 is going to sit there. I mean, that 6-7 season is going to sit on his ledger, and there's not going to be an asterisk next to his name, and people aren't going to give him the benefit of the doubt unless he goes and he wins big this year. And that's what it comes down to for me, and it is going to come down to for so many people, is that Brent Venables has to go and have a successful season in 2025. And what success looks like, I think, to allay any concerns about the future of the team, you've got to look at 9-10 wins. I think you could probably save your job with 8 wins, but I don't think that completely takes you off the hot seat. I think you've got to be in playoff contention. I said it when I was on the portal with our guy Brian Smith on Tuesday's show, that, listen, if Brent Venables wants to save his job and keep his job secure, they've got to be in playoff contention come November. When they get to that 3-game stretch after the bye in November, where they face Alabama, Missouri, and LSU, you've got to be sitting at 8-1. And if they can get to 8-1 there and say they go 2-1 in their final 3 games, they're a playoff team. Shoot, with the schedule that they've got and all the top 25 teams that are on their roster or on their schedule for 2025, they might be a playoff team at 9-3. And as much as I argued against, playoff teams like Alabama or contending teams like Alabama and Ole Miss and South Carolina getting in with 3 losses, if you got Oklahoma's schedule and you got 3 losses, it might be understandable. So, listen, I think Brent Venables is a good coach, just in the fact that what he's done with the defensive side of the ball, what he's able to do on the recruiting trail. I think he's proven to be a good coach. Is he a good head coach? That still remains to be seen. He does a lot of things really well. It's just Oklahoma hasn't had the success just yet to say, yeah, he's a good head coach. He can build a defense. He can recruit well. He can build culture. Now we need to see him go have a successful season coaching this team on the football field. Some other interesting things from this top 25, Kirby Smart comes in at number 1. And listen, I think if you're looking at any team in college football and you're trying to determine who the favorite is for 2025, to me, the list starts with Georgia. And that's because Kirby Smart is the best coach in college football. I know that they're going to have quarterback turnover. You're going from Carson Beck to Gunnar Stockton, but that defense is pretty much always ready to go, right? It's always locked in and ready. And if you can get Gunnar Stockton to be similar to what Stetson Bennett was during their back-to-back national title run, then you're good to go. You don't need a guy to be a 4,000-yard passer and throw for 35 touchdowns in Georgia's system. You need a guy that can make sure he's taking care of the football, which is what Carson Beck was not good at in 2024. Ryan Day, just off the national championship, comes in at number 2. Dan Lanning at number 3. Was a really strong season for Dan Lanning. Unfortunately, ran into the buzzsaw that was Ohio State in the playoffs. Steve Sarkisian at number 4 and Marcus Freeman at number 5. Dabo at number 6. And then Deion Sanders coming in at number 7. That feels a bit rich for me. I think Deion Sanders is a good coach. I think he's going to continue to ascend. He's going to continue to prove that he's one of the better head coaches in college football. He just hasn't proven it yet. Because you've got him sitting in front of like guys like Kyle Whittingham, who have won conference titles, Kalen DeBoer, who's been to the college football playoff, albeit with Washington, Josh Heupel, who was just in the college football playoff, and then Mario Cristobal. I know things at Miami didn't go great this year, but he's been a really good head coach for a long time. So I think Deion Sanders right now is a little bit rich. I like Kenny Dillingham at 13. He's a fast riser, but do you like him better than Lance Leipold? Do you like him better than James Franklin or Brian Kelly or Lane Kiffin? Not quite ready to put Dillingham above those guys. Could he be? Long-term, sure. He could be better than those guys. But I think what you've seen out of Brian Kelly, albeit his LSU record has not been great, when he was at Notre Dame, he was one of the top 5-10 coaches in college football. They're still having to rebuild that defense at LSU from the Ed Orgeron era. You've got to give Brian Kelly, I think, a little bit more respect than that. And then I think same for James Franklin. I think the guy is a good coach, just hasn't been able to win the big one, unfortunately. Maybe he's not a top 10 coach in college football, but you know, I think that there's a chance that he's a little bit better than Kenny Dillingham. And then sitting just in front of Brent Venables, we'll go kind of from the back up, I guess just behind Brent Venables at 25 was Matt Campbell, and then Kalani Sitake at 24. I think maybe there's an argument to put those guys ahead of Brent Venables. They have more recent success. They've kind of proven that they can build a good program when you're going to have lesser talent, and they've gotten the most out of their rosters. So, yeah. Lincoln Riley at number 22, sitting just in front of Brent Venables. I think that's kind of funny by Ari Wasserman. I think he's just doing that to troll everybody. And then Bill Belichick at number 21. Bill Belichick is the GOAT head coach at the NFL level. Can he translate that to success at the collegiate level? The name is going to ring out when he's on the recruiting trail. At the same time, he kind of struggled to have some success in the post-Tom Brady world up in New England, which is why he retired, quote unquote, retired, and then why he's in the college football world. But again, his name rings out. He has a lot of cachet behind him because of all the Super Bowl wins. If he's going to have success, or if any head coach could have success making that transition from the NFL to the college game, nobody better situated to take advantage of what they did in the NFL than Bill Belichick. So, listen, I like Brent Venables. I think he's a good coach. 23 might be a little bit more respect than I or Oklahoma fans would be ready to put on his name. But if he goes and has a 9-10 win season this year, contends for the playoff, puts Oklahoma in a position come November to be in the SEC title race, then it makes sense. But it's got to have a big year. He's going to have a big year. That's just what it comes down to for Brent Venables. You're seeing it all over Oklahoma Sooners content, whether it's on the written side or the podcast side, that it's a make or break year for Brent Venables. And I think that's going to be the way 2025 lives and is for the Oklahoma Sooners, but I think he's going to rise to the occasion. And I think this team is going to be maybe a lot more successful in 25 than they were in 2024. Should the Oklahoma Sooners continue to have a spring game? Well, Matt Rule is not so sure that Nebraska will. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. Looking for tickets for your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue, so it's reassuring. I also recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to deliver on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Lowest price guaranteed over at Game Time. Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. Go check out the bonus content I did after Oklahoma's loss to Auburn. Talked a little bit about Joe Lunardi's recent bracketology and what Oklahoma might have to do over their final 9 games to have a spot in the NCAA tournament. But now let's talk about what Matt Rule had to say about Oklahoma, or the spring game, and what that could mean for the Oklahoma Sooners in the future, because the whole recruiting, transfer portal, tampering situation that we're seeing across college football is becoming a bigger and bigger issue all the time. And it's kind of putting coaches on edge. And here's what Rule had to say about it. He's like, I'll be honest with you, I highly doubt it. And I think it's really fundamentally, I hate to say it like this, it really, because last year were one of the more televised spring games, I dealt with a lot of people offering our players a lot of opportunities after that. So to go out and bring in a bunch of new players and then showcase them for all the other schools to watch, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The word tampering doesn't exist anymore. It's just absolutely free, open, common market. And so I don't necessarily want to open up to the outside world. I don't want these guys all being able to watch our guys and say, wow, he looks like a pretty good player. I'll go get him, or let's go get him. So it's really fascinating because he's absolutely right. I mean, the world of recruiting right now is Tamper City. There is nobody that's off limits, and teams can get around tampering by using third parties to reach out to players. And maybe in some places it's assistants that are actually doing the reaching out, but players are being tampered with. Oklahoma's players are being tampered with. We know that Jaden Jackson was being pursued by somebody, and they had to go out there and basically say, no, we're not going anywhere. That's not happening. So I get where Matt Rule's coming from. I understand his desire to insulate his program a little bit from some of that and keep the dogs off his team, like keep people from circling the gates and putting him in a position where he's having to fight to retain his own players, even in spring. Like, it's not like this is the end of the season and the transfer portal is about to open up for the winter window and guys are trying to assess if they've got better opportunities elsewhere or not. Those guys don't know what the future holds. Now, there might be situations, and this is probably why the spring portal season exists. There might be situations where a guy goes into spring ball, has an understanding what his role is going to be, goes through spring game, finds out, hey, maybe I don't have much of a role here, and then he can decide to transfer. At that point, the opportunities are going to come up if he's good enough to find an opportunity elsewhere. But for a guy to be happy-go-lucky, just moving along with his day, going through spring practice, going through the spring game, happy and content with the situation at Nebraska, and then he starts getting opportunities and offers through the tampering that is occurring in college football, I can understand why head coaches would be frustrated by that. Because here's a kid that's content. He's doing all the right things. He's trusting the process. He's looking to develop. It's like I keep talking about with a guy like Jaden Gibson, a guy that has all the talent in the world. And after his freshman season where he didn't really play a whole lot, could have gotten frustrated and decided to leave and go pursue other options. But he stuck it out. And then in 2023 had kind of a semi-breakout. You know, he didn't play a ton, but he did have 14 catches. He had 5 touchdowns. He was averaging a boatload of yards per reception. And it was just unfortunate that he got injured in 2024 because I think that would have been his full breakout season. He was going to look like a guy in line to start for Oklahoma at wide receiver because you had Andrew Anthony coming off injury. Nick Anderson was getting banged up in practice. And so Jalil Farouk was healthy, but I think a lot of folks expected Jaden Gibson to pass him up. But even if he didn't, you were going to see a lot of Jaden Gibson last year. But he was trusting the process. If it would be really frustrating to see, like, okay, Jaden Gibson has a really good year, goes through spring, and if you're Brent Venables, now you're having to deal with teams coming after him in the spring portal session to try and lure him away from Oklahoma when he's content and happy with what he's dealing with and with what he's got. So this is a part where college football has got to figure out how to put a lid on some of the portal stuff and on some of the tampering that's occurring out there in college football, because it's not going to get better until somebody outs it or investigations come that hold teams accountable for third parties reaching out to players on their behalf. You know, if it's not an assistant, but it's a collective or it's a donor that's reaching out to a player to try and get them to come to Oklahoma. If that's happening, then the NCAA needs to figure out who it is, investigate it, and hold those teams accountable for the actions of the collectives or the donors. I mean, if you don't want to be held accountable for those things, then don't let your guys do those things. But I think it's going to be a complicated issue that continues to rear its ugly head for every major program across the country, because teams are going to want to try and steal your depth and steal your top talent. But I think Oklahoma needs to keep having a spring game. It's one of the best events of the offseason. And even when it's not, full football time, the spring game draws numbers. The spring game does numbers on ESPN Plus. It's a good opportunity to showcase your team. It's a good opportunity to let Oklahoma fans that aren't able to get to Norman for the spring game to see your team and to continue to build excitement for what that team might be. I know that there was a lot of excitement and expectation coming out of the 2024 spring game after we watched Jackson Arnold and Deion Burks hook up for 3 touchdowns in the spring game. I think there was a lot of excitement about that. It's just unfortunate that what we saw in the spring game never really came to pass in the 2024 season. So I think there's a place for spring games, but man, I understand Matt Rule's frustration. I understand any coach's frustration where you're having to constantly ward off recruiting of your own players and tampering with your own players. So, but again, hopefully this doesn't affect Oklahoma spring game. Hopefully it's a situation where they can figure out a way to put a lid on some of the tampering, put a lid on some of the transfer portal stuff. Even if it's, hey, we're getting rid of the spring window altogether. You got one transfer portal time. You can enter your name in the portal at that time, and then that's it. But once spring ball comes, once you're enrolled on campus, you're locked in for that year. And maybe it cuts down on some of the tampering. Maybe it prevents coaches from having to deal with it. I don't know. But yeah, something's got to come to fruition, and the NCAA has got to figure that out, and so much more. National Signing Day is coming up. What can we expect from the Oklahoma Sooners? Probably not a lot. So let's talk about their 2025 recruiting class coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. Again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. It's National Signing Day across college football, but it's not really the same. It's not what it was, right? Because the early signing period, because so many players like to early enroll, National Signing Day has lost a lot of its luster. And for a team like the Oklahoma Sooners, they're pretty much done on the recruiting trail. If there were a surprise on National Signing Day, it would kind of shock me if they added another guy, because I think they're at their roster limit, and anybody else that you're trying to bring in, you're going to have to make room for them. So where does Oklahoma's 2025 class stand? I think it's a really good class. Is it small yet? Number 8, or it's 18 players, number 17 in the nation in the 247 team sports or team recruiting rankings. It's number 10 among SEC teams. But as I talked about, I think it was a week ago, at Blue Chip, among those SEC teams in blue chip ratio, the Oklahoma Sooners rank 6th, which is a good place to be. They've got a greater than 50% blue chip ratio, which the stats say that if you have a greater than 50% blue chip ratio, you have a greater chance to contend for a national title than those teams that are under 50%. Will Oklahoma contend for a national title? That's the big question that's on everybody's mind. But it's a good class. It starts with Michael Fasusi, obviously. That was the big fish in this cycle. Oklahoma was after him for a long, long time. They were recruiting him for a long, long time, and they were able to get the big fish. They were able to get Michael Fasusi, and he's a guy that has a chance to play early in his career. And I know it's easy to look at what Bill Bedenbaugh's done at offensive line and maybe poo-poo the idea that Michael Fasusi could play early, but just go back to the 2023 season when Caden Green was able to find a role on the offensive line for the Sooners, and he became one of Oklahoma's best offensive linemen, and then got tampered with and left for Missouri. So I think there's a role or a potential role for Michael Fasusi. A lot of it just comes down to how does he respond when he gets on campus and in spring workouts and spring ball. I say winter workout, spring ball. Does he learn the playbook? Does he ascend the depth chart? We'll see. Oklahoma's got solid depth. I just don't think it's anybody that could potentially be as good as him. And so if he's one of your better players, you got to play him. If he's the best offensive tackle that you've got, whether he's a true freshman or not, you got to play him. You've got to put your best 5 out there, regardless of their experience, regardless of what they might, what kind of mistakes they may or may not make. You've got to take a chance. And Michael Fasusi, Ryan Foje even are 2 players that are worth taking chances on, are worth letting them go through the process of making freshman mistakes and getting better. You're gonna be challenged and tested early in your schedule. But if they can survive a Michigan game, if they can survive an Auburn game and play well, then that kind of sets them up for a good rest of the season. Elsewhere, one of my favorite players in this class is running back Tory Blaylock. I don't know if we're talking enough about him. 5'10", 195, and speed for days. The dude is so fast, but I think the thing that I like about him most is he has really, really good contact balance. He runs fast, but when he does take a hit, when he is contacted by the defender, he's able to maintain his balance. He's able to keep moving down the field. He can keep churning out yards. He can pick up yards after contact. And that's what you got to be able to do at running back. You can't go down on first contact. That's some of our frustration with a guy like Gavin Sawchuk, right? It seemed like too many times he goes down as soon as he gets contacted. And so you've got, or Javonte Barnes, you got to be able to make people miss. You got to be able to bounce off tackles and pick up dirty yards. And Tory Blaylock's really showed to be really, really good at that at the high school level. Now, I don't know how much of an opportunity he'll get in 2025 because your running back room is still really, really good. It's got a good depth between Taylor Tatum, Xavier Robinson, Gavin Sawchuk, Javonte Barnes, Sam Franklin. You kind of got your 5. And are you going to play 5 guys? I don't know. I think one of those or 2 of those guys might still portal out after spring ball. Once they kind of figure out what the running back hierarchy is going to look like, those guys could end up portaling out. But if Tory Blaylock does get on the field, he's a guy that you want to get the ball in his hands in space and just let him use his speed and go win. And I think there's a role for him in the offense, especially in a spread offense where they want to get the ball out in space. Just throwing him a swing pass or two and just challenging the defense, putting it on film so that teams have to be accountable for him. I think there's something there. Also really like Darius Afalava out of Utah, the 6'5", 320 guard. You got to have size. In the SEC, you got to have size on the interior. And at times, Oklahoma was just a little bit too light in the middle. And so I'm really, really intrigued by what he might be able to do for the Oklahoma Sooners. Jet New at quarterback. I know this was one of those that just kind of came out of nowhere, but I like his game, man. He's an accurate passer. He wastes no time in the pocket. He gets to his drop, hits it, lets the ball go. And that's the beauty of a spread offense, of the air raid, is it's a timing offense. It's not allowing yourself to be stuck in the pocket waiting for guys to get open. You're 1, 2, 3, throw it. And he throws with anticipation. He throws with accuracy. I think that's a really underrated part of this class. And then you go back to CJ Nixon. I think he's got a chance to be a star. The athleticism is there. If he can continue to develop and he can show that athleticism is going to be able to translate to the collegiate level, especially the SEC level, then he's going to have a chance to be as impactful as an R. Mason Thomas coming off the edge at defensive end. He's got great length. He's got great size. He's got great athleticism. And I mean, he's got all the tools. Now it's just a matter of putting it on the field. It's a really fun class, dude. Owen Hollenbeck, is the lowest rated player on 247 Sports team rankings or player rankings. But again, we've talked about him as well. Good size, good strength, good functional strength. When you have a guy like that at center who is a power lifter, he's a wrestler, that kind of stuff allows you to be better than what maybe your star rating can be. Oftentimes, I think recruiting spaces have a hard time evaluating offensive line play. That's not to say that they get it wrong a lot. That's just to say that evaluating interior offensive line play is tough. And so trying to figure out how good a guy like Owen Hollenbeck is might be a little bit challenging. But the dude is strong. And that strength is going to be really beneficial to Oklahoma's offensive line in the future. He may not play a whole lot this year with Troy Everett starting. You got Josh Isosa. You've got some centers on your team that have a little bit more experience, but it wouldn't surprise me if he fights his way onto the 2 deep. Because again, you can't teach strength and you can't teach that physicality. And if he can bring that to the Oklahoma Sooners into the collegiate level, I think he's going to have a chance to be a big time player for them at some point. If not in 2025, then down the road. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in, being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. You can follow the show on all the social media platforms at Locked On Sooners. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. But until next time, for my buddy Jay Smith, who is just out having a blast with his lovely wife, I'm John Williams. We'll talk to you next time. Boomer Sooner.